Beautiful sunny day today. It's the first time I've seen non-rain in Oregon, so this is actually pretty cool. So, let me ask you: do you guys have an Oregon greeting? Something that people just always say to one another? Do you guys have that? Like, I grew up down south in Georgia, and so our standard greeting was, "How about them dogs?" And to which you would always reply, "How about them dogs?" And the important thing was that you had this, you couldn't say it the same way. So one is, "How about them dogs?" And then the replies, "How about them dogs?" And that's the same thing as, "Hello, how are you doing?" We actually have something similar in Philadelphia that I'm going to teach you. So if you ever go east and you feel like you're not sure you're going to fit in, this will get you in to Philadelphia. It's a similar thing. It's got a cadence to it, but once you get the cadence, you can master it. So it goes like this. If you're greeting somebody, you say, "Yo, how you doing?" It's a little different than "How about them dogs?" "Yo, how you doing?" So I want you to practice that. 1, 2, 3. "Yo, how you doing?" Okay, it's just 2 words. "How you doing" is 1 word. So when someone says that to you reply, "Yo, how you doing?" So let's do that. I'm gonna greet you and you respond back to me. "Yo, how you doing?" Oh, you got it. Okay, great. You are now safe on the streets of Philadelphia. So as far as I can
believe you that we're safe on the streets. With our concealed carry.
With the concealed carry permits. Gun laws are a little different in my world. So anyway, just want to before we jump in, I wanted to see if anybody had any questions, or as you're reflecting from last night, anything. The biggest thing I care about is whether I'm clear. And whether I'm helpful. So maybe you were thinking about it or listening last night and you didn't have a question, but you thought about it. Before we move on, I want to make sure anybody had anything that they'd like to touch on, just to clarify. So anybody have any questions or thoughts or comments? Yep.
So you made a comment somewhat similar to saying how God enjoys. I'm going to really butcher your paraphrase.
Just don't post it anywhere. Just don't tweet it. Andy Farmer. Blah, blah, blah.
It's more in a oneness of marriage than 2 individuals.
Yes.
That was a really impactful thing to take.
Yeah.
And so I started wrestling with it and trying to come at it from the opposite side, saying, well, how is that true?
Yes.
And because there's a lot in my mind, in my heart, where I'm thinking that I need to have that
Yeah.
relationship, and then from that relationship, me as the leader,
Sure.
I need to lead.
Yes.
But there's a oneness there that challenged me.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, if you want to talk more about that, I'm all ears.
Sure, yeah. Biblically, a great place to go is 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul is advocating that people stay single for the sake of the kingdom. But if you're married, it's okay. But you will have concerns that those who are not married won't have. Those concerns are not distractions from God's purpose. They are part of God's purpose. Once we are married, we embrace concerns of marriage from God that we don't have when we're single. So it is wrong to say, well, yet we're married, but God's called me to this. Everything God calls you to, your spouse is involved with, and her spiritual life, his spiritual life is wound up in that. We can't sort of say, well, God's called me, just go with where I want to go. No, because you have a covenant union that you must account for in every decision. So you'll never have God say something to you that doesn't in some form affect the other person and therefore needs to resonate, and it needs to be handled in covenant, in union. So 1 Corinthians 7 is a great place to go to really see Paul play out the implications. That's why he's saying, I'd prefer people to be single. Why? Not because it's a better state, but because I know people who are single are not encumbered by what is required to live out a marriage covenant. So rather than sort of say, I wouldn't say, okay, one's more important. our individual spiritual lives. We'll be judged for who we are. We're not going to be judged for our spouse. But it's all interesting in Ephesians 5. Paul says, present her to the Lord. Part of your inherent call as a man is to present your wife to the Lord, having fulfilled who she's supposed to be. So that's a way of thinking about it. The practical implications are, yeah, I need to tend to my own soul, but for multiple reasons. Not just for me, but for her as well. And wives the same way. I need to tend to my own soul. One of the dangers for women in a submissive approach is I'm going to cede my spirituality to my husband. I'm simply submitting to his. Well, no, God holds you accountable for your own obedience. If your husband calls you to do something on the basis of leadership that is unbiblical, you must stand with Jesus. That's why, and again, in 1 Peter, how do you win your husband? It's by your following Jesus. The way you live your life before Jesus is your best witness. So that's what will happen sometimes in marriages where you'll see there's such a strong leadership submission approach that the wife doesn't understand. She tends to her soul, and her husband also tends to it, and she tends to his soul. The way it's supposed to work, and it can go wonky in 1,000 different ways, but the way it's supposed to work is my interest as a husband is my own soul and the good of my wife in Jesus, and the wife is my own soul and the good of my husband in Jesus. And that's how Ephesians 5 is essentially supposed to work. Two people committing to that one goal. And then you have rich spiritual individual lives and a rich spiritual marriage. Is that helpful? Okay. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Excellent question. Okay. Well, we're going to jump in today. Last night, I don't want to minimize how important last night was, even though it can seem mundane. Yeah, be careful with ungracious speech and be thankful and encourage. It can feel like a low bar. It can feel like, well, that's, of course, yeah, we should do that. But the things we're going to cover today and tomorrow, if those things aren't happening, all of this doesn't work. You can't jump to the deeper things over the simple things. So I'd much rather if you came away this weekend with anything, there may be some benefit today. I hope there is. Tomorrow, I hope there is. But if you just skip over last night, you will not make it very far. You will stumble and bumble and never quite see the growth you want to see. So my emphasis is always say, speak kindly, speak well, speak graciously, speak wisely. And a lot of the other things we'll talk about today get accomplished when you do that. So that is the foundation. So today we're going to talk about what I would call humble correction, which may seem like an oxymoron. I'll give you a quick story. When I first became a pastor in my church, I came on full-time as a pastor. And I was and what we used to do, we used to have weekly elders meetings. And our senior pastor, Dave Harvey, what he would do is he would put together an agenda for that elders meeting. And the way he did it, this is we were just discovering the joys of computers and everything. So what he would do is he would take a sheet of paper and he would write the agenda items, and number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and write them on a sheet of paper and then put it into his administrative assistant's box, and then she would type it up. So the next day we had an agenda. That's the way we did things. So I was 4 weeks in, to my 1 month into my pastorate, and I just decided, I'm curious about what we're going to talk about tomorrow. So I pulled out the agenda that he had handwritten, and at the top of it, item number 1 was review Andy. And so I thought, that's interesting, that's new. And so on the way home, I thought, this is really good because I worked at my job for 8 years and never got a review. Man, they are reviewing month in. They're reviewing performance. And I thought, that's the kind of leadership I count on from these guys. And so I was very grateful. And I got home and I told Jill about it. She said, oh, really? And I said, yeah, really. And then I started thinking about it a little bit. And I started thinking you know, yeah, what is the deal with this? I mean, I'm a month in. You know, how do you have enough data to review me after a month? I'm still trying to figure out how to put things in my desk. You know, I'm coming from a whole different world. You know, isn't it? It seems premature to be reviewing. This sounds a little like it probably isn't that helpful. And I thought, okay, what have I gotten myself into? Like, what kind of legalistic nonsense are we dealing with here? Where they're going to jump on my case like a month in, and then I'm like, I ain't going to do it. I ain't going to take it. I'm going in and I'm saying, I'm seeing this item, guys. Let me just interrupt everything right there. I'm not going to do this. I don't know what you guys have been doing. I'm not doing this. So I was running there, and then about 3 a.m, because I wasn't sleeping, because of this, I came to Lord. Oh, that is so proud. That's so arrogant. Lord, I need to humble myself, Lord. And then I started realizing, well, maybe God's just not calling me to be a pastor, and maybe they're going to try to help me to see that. So by the time I got in there at 8:30 in the morning, I had my resignation. I was like, guys, I know you want to review me, but let's start with this. This is all my thinking as I'm walking in. Here's my resignation letter. So, yeah. I just want you to know that I'm willing to go back to my old job. It's not too late. I can still get it back. And I picked up the agenda that was typed up now, and at the top it said item number 1, review Sunday. And I just had misread that top item. So, I thought it said review Andy and it said review Sunday. I was like, if you've been on an eldership team, you know what this feels like. And I was like, and it highlighted how much I hate correction. I just hate it. I couldn't just simply just come in there and say, God, yeah, bring it on, sure, whatever. Yes, great. Yeah, good feedback. That wasn't me. I basically spent 24 hours in agony because I was afraid of correction. That's what we do. Nobody likes it. Anybody who says they like correction, they may have a highly developed ability to turn it into good input, but nobody likes the experience. We want attaboys. My brother-in-law worked at a nuclear power plant. One of his things is he said at the plant we get a lot of attaboys. We get a lot of encouragement. Well done. And said you only need one oh crap to mess up a whole lot of attaboys in a nuclear plant. So we just don't like it.
So good.
But one of the best ways to build resilience in marriage is to learn how to give and receive correction well. This skill has significant benefits for the unity in our marriage. It allows important issues to be dealt with so they don't get stored up as potential roots of bitterness and anger. In one of my counseling classes, the professor was talking about the tendency to gunny sack, and it's a term he used in the military. But he's talked about you have this big sack, and then things don't go well in your marriage. You just kind of put them in the sack, and you put them in the sack, and you keep putting them in the sack, and you don't deal with them. And then when you have a minor conflict, boom, you dump them all out at one time. And suddenly, the fact that you left your keys in the wrong spot back in January of 2017 comes out as another illustration of the problem. And those kind of things happen. And so that's what happens. We get bitter and we get anger and we build it up. It also, good correction keeps our communication truthful by undercutting the temptation to influence our husband and wife through nagging, through complaining, through sarcasm, through intimidation. We will correct one another in marriage no matter what. The only question is it helpful? Yeah. The only question is, does it produce good fruit? You might say, well, we don't need, our marriage, we don't need correction. No, you're probably correcting all the time. And it may come out in a tone of voice. It may come out in I may realize that I'm on your good side right now, and I'm doing the things you want me to do by the way you relate to me. Now I'm not on your good side. There may be coldness. There may be, you may just not talk about anything significant because you can't talk about anything without it seeming like an attack. We all correct. The issue is not I'm introducing the idea of correction into a marriage context. The issue is we're always correcting, but often we don't do it well. And when that happens over time in a marriage, the resilience breaks down. The fear of attack emerges. The sense that I can't do anything right starts to play out. The sense that I'm always performing. The sense that I've got to try to placate you so that you don't get upset with me all starts to become a dominant theme in a marriage. And when that happens, then a marriage gets brittle. And it doesn't withstand trial very well. So we need to know how to correct. Another thing it does is good correction produces abiding trust. A graciously given and received correction produces the good fruit of fellowship and change. If you're able to do this, and again I'm saying nobody naturally receives well. We don't have that level of humility. That's something that I don't think most of us ever attain. We're working at it. We want to do better, and over time we hope that we're better, but nobody is just a lover of correction. But as we do this, if you have a successful time where there's a correction brought and received, an application made, it produces trust. It produces a sense that my words matter to you. It produces a sense that what you're trying to bring to me is for my own good and not just for your good. And that builds trust. And so we need to be able to do this and grow in this well because it builds strength. So what biblical correction is not, and we're talking about biblical correction here, it is not yelling at you. That's never biblical correction. Tone of voice, volume is as important as content in correction. It is not just simply telling you how I feel. There's a lot of therapeutic counseling that goes on these days that has to do with you need to be able to tell your spouse how you feel. There's a place for that, but that cannot be correction because I feel this way has no bearing on what you now need to do. My feelings need to be evaluated as to whether they reflect an accurate situation that needs to be dealt with or I'm just sinning. So our feelings are important as barometers, but what they're actually revealing needs to be explored. So just simply saying, this is how I feel, cannot be considered corrective. It's just a statement of a momentary situation. Correction is not fixing you with my words. I can't look at correction and saying, I'm going to tell this to you and I expect it to change you. If that was happening, we probably wouldn't need to be correction in the first place, right? If I could because most of the things our spouse will tell us, we probably already know. They're rarely going to tell us something that we don't at some level know. So the idea that I can tell this to you and I can walk away and say, good, she's done, she's good, is a pipe dream. It doesn't happen that way. We don't change because Dave knows from preaching. You don't preach to the church and think, okay, everybody's going to apply this week. By Tuesday, they're going to not remember what you preached about. Yeah, usually Monday, that's right. They'll remember the text through Monday. They'll remember, okay, we were somewhere in Genesis, yeah, somewhere, and where's that in the Bible? I don't, but life fills our life. What Dave's counting on is over time, the faithful preaching of the word shapes us. And so we want a culture in marriage where the same thing, if we're talking about things, over time we're shaped. We're not looking to change people through our words. Biblical correction is not fun. If you enjoy correcting people, if you have the gift of discernment, I can spot where there's sin. I'm going to correct you, and that's where I feel the pleasure of God when I am corrective, when I am prophetic. No. You're just arrogant. We'll talk about this later. The easiest thing in the world is to see somebody's problems. And the closer you get to them, the more problems you will see. It takes no spiritual gift to see problems. It takes tremendous grace to see grace. To see what God might want to do, though I'm aware of your problems. So we should not enjoy correction. It is not avoidable. Like I said, you will correct whether you do it well or not. Here's very important. Correction, according to the Bible, is not conflict. Correction is fellowship. You put the array of interactions in the Bible and you say, okay, on this side, these are all things that have to do with conflict and dealing with conflict, and these are all things that have to do with relationship and fellowship, and we want to stay on this side, we want to stay off of this side, and if we're on this side of conflict, we want to move over here. Where does correction fit? It fits over here in fellowship. It's normal. It's the sign of health, not the sign of a lack of health. So even though it might feel like conflict, because we don't feel close to one another sometimes in the midst of it, the Bible describes correction as a form of fellowship. We talked about it last night. Exhort one another. That's a corrective word. Come alongside, help somebody avoid one direction and go another direction. So it is not conflict. So it's not a form of fighting. It is a form of fellowship. So we're going to look at a passage, very familiar. I like, in a seminar like this, to draw from familiar passages because we all know them. And if you don't know it by heart, you've been taught it. You've probably read it. You've probably tried to apply it. And so all we're doing is taking some familiar passages and working them into this discussion today. So we're going to be in Matthew 7. Verses 1 to 5, this is Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. He's kind of starting to wind up. He has a lot of powerful things yet to say, but he's starting to wind up the Sermon on the Mount. And so in verse 1 of chapter 7, he says this, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll be able to see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." So here's some insights from this passage related to correction, how this passage can help us. And it's a very important passage for me. As a pastor, it's a very important passage to me because I realize in almost every conversation I have as a pastor, in some form, there's a corrective coming from that conversation. People are inviting it. They actually will come in and take time off of work to come in and receive correction. I should recognize that, and I should say, Lord, I want to be careful. If you're a pastor, you're a small group leader here, when someone comes to you with a problem, it is not your opportunity to go ballistic. It is not an opportunity to start firing the missiles. Somebody is coming to you, and they're seeking help, and we need to help them. But there is correction needed in relationship. And that's what this is about. The fundamental purpose of this particular section of this is that Jesus is addressing a need. There is a need for correction. The illustration, the speck in your eye, is chosen by Jesus to highlight that there's somebody that has a real need that we can help. I don't know if you've ever I'm sure we all at some point have had the experience of the speck in our eye. I remember when I was going into our church offices one day, it's a very windy day, and I'm walking up to the door, and boom, something is in my eye. I don't know where it came from, but suddenly my eye sort of spazzed shut. And I was like, what is going on? So I get in my office, and I realized there's a piece of dust or something got in my eye. And I'm sitting there and I've got an appointment coming in and I'm thinking, I've got to cancel this appointment because I can't focus on anything else because of this speck. And that'll happen. If you have something in your eye, the reason Paul is really Jesus is drawing this illustration out is because he's kind of giving them a picture of somebody who is totally consumed by one thing they can't deal with. The speck in your eye. If you know that experience, you know that when there's a speck in my eye, I'm not thinking about my budget. I'm not thinking about tomorrow is this or that. I'm thinking about how can I get this out of my eye? This is and it's something that just and the longer it stays in there, the more it irritates. And so I'm flushing my eye. I'm getting whatever it is, and so my life is consumed with this one issue. That's the picture that we're talking about here. The person who's got the speck in their eye, they are blinded. They cannot see. They cannot see accurately. They cannot respond to life accurately because of what's going on here. And so it becomes a necessity for them, for their own good, to receive the help of someone else, incapable of doing it on their own, incapable of pulling it out. And again, where you're talking about where Jesus is in the Sermon on the Mount, it's not like there's a faucet somewhere. It's not like they're sailing somewhere. They're in the desert. They're on a mountain in the desert. That means there's no water anywhere. So if you're sitting there on the mountain and it's a dusty world over there, there's probably a dozen people in that crowd who are dealing with specks in their own eye right now, and they're saying, "I can't listen to you, Jesus. I got this speck in my eye." But that's the point. If you see it in context, it's vivid because they all know it. I know what you're talking about because we live with specks in our eyes in this culture. So he's using that. It's a very real, very relevant illustration for them. So we have need. We have need for help because when we have a blindness, it is a blindness that keeps us from doing what we know we need to do. Second point is this, from this text. There is a judge, and I am not him. The picture here is the judgment seat. The picture here is there is a God on the throne of judgment who sees all accurately, who knows everything, and sees clearly. And he is the standard bearer for what is right and what is wrong, what needs to be corrected and what doesn't. If I come to a situation with my spouse and I come with, I need this to be fixed, this is wrong, but I'm using my own judgment, then I am sitting in the judgment seat of God in that posture. And God will not have it. God will not have it. He says, you want to do that? You go right ahead. By the standard you judge, by the self-righteousness you judge, I will judge you. There's a strict and severe warning about any kind of judgmentalism, any kind of attitude of self-righteousness, any sense that I'm superior, any sense that I understand what you need and you need to change because it's a moral issue for me. We are warned here by Jesus. And so if you're in a marriage where you're comfortable saying things with a judgmental spirit, your problem is much deeper than you think. There is a God who is watching, and he is not mocked. And maybe before you bring that next correction, you need to recognize who sits in the judgment seat and get out of it yourself. We also need to recognize from this passage that we have our own ongoing need for correction. We never correct as people who don't need correction. We correct as people who need correction. Correction is just my turn up. If I'm receiving correction, it should be because as a couple we recognize in this moment, this correction is for me. Could be next week, I'm correcting you. It should not be a one-way street. We all need correction. Proverbs 15:31 and 32 speaks to the idea that we should value correction for ourselves. The writer says, "The ear that listens to life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. Whoever ignores instruction despises himself, but he who listens to reproof gains intelligence." One of the biggest things, here's an interesting thing. And you talk to my fellow elders, they would say he has never been the guy we go to as the guy who receives correction well. I think I've grown. I think it went from a weakness to being not quite a strength. I'm not sure it'll ever be a strength. There are guys on my team who, for it means it's strength. I don't think I'm one of those guys. But I think what has helped me, one is the call to humility, right? Humble yourself before the Lord and he will raise you up. But one of the things, that's a call to of character. But I've also needed a vision call. What do I want from this? I don't want to just endure correction. And I've gotten it from Proverbs. I want to be wise. I don't want to be the fool. I don't want to be the fool. And one of the things that helps me respond to correction, even if it's not brought well, is, Lord, I want to be wise here. I want to be wise. Somehow you're going to use this for my wisdom. And what I found is that people who really resist correction are not wise people. They're self-blinding people. Paul Tripp made a point one time where he said there are physically blind people and there are spiritually blind people. And he said physically blind people know they are blind, sight impaired, sight impaired, and have adjusted and have learned how to live with that sight impairment in a productive way. People who are spiritually blind think they see.
Yes.
And they are fools.
Yes.
If we think we see, we are spiritually blind. We may see clearly in a moment, but we don't see clearly all the time. We may have an accurate view of our spouse in a moment, but it's not going to be all the time. Sometimes our awareness of our spouse's weaknesses, sins, limitations is very acute and accurate. Doesn't mean we should correct out of it. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we miss what they're really good at. The biggest thing we miss in our marriages, a lot of times what we don't see is where God is working in our spouse apart from us. We sort of presume the change agenda for my spouse comes always through me. I'm the broker of all change from God. Okay, God, okay, what do you got going here? Okay, well, okay, good. I'll put it into my plan and I'll bring it. Thank you very much. We got it. I got this from God. I've reordered it a little bit. He was going to work on this, but I think this is better for you right now, and we're going to go with that. No, we are at best ministers on behalf of God. We are at best tools that God uses for a sanctification project where if we get pulled out for some reason, God's still going to work in that person's life. We are not essential to that person's sanctification in the Lord. We're essential for a good marriage, but we're not essential for their sanctification. We are one of a means of tools that can be used by God. So don't put yourself in a position where you have a distinct knowledge of the person's need and you're going to meet it. We correct on the basis of relationship, not insight. We correct on the basis of relationship. Where do you see that? How many times is the word brother used? If your brother struggles, if your brother. Jesus is speaking to people who don't yet understand the true nature of Christian brotherhood because he has not gone to be with the Father and has not brought people into adoption. But he's using that term to train them to understand that in his world, in his culture, in his kingdom, we are brothers and sisters. One of the things we always have to recognize in our marriages is that, and this can feel awkward, but it's a truth, that our base level of relationship is not husband and wife. It's fellow heirs with Christ. It is children of God. It is brother and sister. That's what we are. We are brother and sister in the Lord before we are husband and wife. That's an add-on to the basic relationship. That's why the Bible is clear on not marrying unbelievers, because you don't have the base relationship out of which husband and wife can really function. And so this comes out of relationship. You see that Paul says that in 1 Corinthians 14. If I have all insight, all knowledge, but I have not love, it what? It means nothing. People will think that Paul is really saying, well, it means that I have to be careful and act loving with what I bring. It says, no, you either have love or you don't. And if you don't have love, whatever you've got here, as accurate as it is, means nothing. Nada. Niet. Nothing. And so we have to recognize we help one another based on relationship. This can be very helpful. How many people have teenagers here? Okay, enough of you to know what I'm talking about. You have all kinds of insights for your teens, don't you? How much are they actually getting from you? Maybe not very much. Why? Because you think parenting teens is about insight. Wrong, buddy. It's not about insight. They already know what you're going to say. You're going to have a conversation with your teenage son about something. He already has the script. He's been reading the script. He's got his rebuttal all set up. You ain't getting nowhere if you think your insights are going to trump his behavior. It don't work like that. If you don't have a relationship, he may let you speak, but he will not listen to what you say. We have to build relationship. And in our marriage, it's the same way. We may have insight into our spouse, but if we don't approach relationally, based on this relationship that we are fellow heirs with Christ, and God has brought us together as husband and wife, that precious union, and out of this is how I'm coming to you. Our insights matter nothing. So, insights, dime a dozen, frankly. Correction, and this is important too, correction is not police work. It is surgery. That's the illustration. That's the picture Jesus is using. How can we talked about, you've got your own issues. How can, you've got your own log in your own eye. The picture there going back to this issue of, you imagine two people who both have specks in their eyes. Well, the issue is not somebody has a big log. What he's basically saying is when you have a speck in your eye, it might as well be a log in terms of your ability to see, right? That's what he's saying. He's actually saying from your perspective toward the other person, you just think they have a speck, but when you've got that speck, it feels like a log. How can you help somebody if you don't get rid of your log? And so what he's saying is that he said, first you've got to deal with yourself and make sure you don't have your eyes are clear to see, before you can then do surgery. Would you want to go into surgery with a surgeon? And let's say he's working on your eyes. I've only been in the hospital twice in my life overnight. Once when I was 6 and once when I was 10 for eye surgery. I still have traumatic memories of, and I was out, but of just the idea that they were going to work on my eye. It is so hard for me to let anybody near my eyes. I couldn't do contacts because I can't let me near my own eyes. They occupy their own space, and I just let them do what they're going to do. I'll just keep adding bit thicker lenses to give them all they need. But the idea is that we wouldn't let somebody close to our eyes who couldn't see clearly how to get the speck, who couldn't operate gently and carefully. who wouldn't go in with a, let me just yank this out, let me just rub this out. We want somebody who, if they're going to operate on us, if they're going to bring correction, if they're going to bring the surgical skill that comes with correcting, we need to know that they see clearly. If we're going to trust them, if you're going to invite correction into your marriage, which I've already said, you're going to be correcting, it's whether you do it well. You've got to do this work. Last night is prep for surgery. That's what last night was about in a lot of ways. It's just how do we get you prepped for surgery? How do we get the surgeon prepped? We're getting ready to go in the operating room in our marriages. How do we make sure? We make sure about we don't, we clean things up. We get rid of the corrosive, nasty stuff. We train our hands. We get our skills together. So we do that because Proverbs 12:18 says, there is one who speaks rashly like the thrust of a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. I don't want someone coming to correct me with a sword. I don't want somebody slashing me with a sword. I want someone bring healing. I want that corrective tone, corrective content to have as its goal healing me in my need. And the goal of correction is that someone may see more clearly, to have their eyes open to God and His ways. And so if our correction, because that's what seeing clearly is. Seeing clearly is not getting more and more focused on my sin. Seeing clearly is not trying to fix my behavior because it bothers you. Seeing clearly is not recognizing, gosh, and okay, one more thing that I'm not doing well. Seeing clearly is being able to perceive God and His ways in my life. When correction is well brought, more times than not, in fact, I'd say in every time in my life, it is connected to something God's already doing. The person bringing it may not even know that. But if they bring it well, then my heart is open to what God might be saying, and I recognize, well, yeah, there's actually examples of this. I don't need to get examples from you because I've got examples for myself. I've just never seen them this way. You've given me a way to look at my life that I haven't seen before, and that is connecting with what God is doing. And now I've looked at why when I read this section of Scripture in my devotions, has this come alive to me? It's not really made sense. And why have I sat under preaching and had this thing, kind of affect me in certain ways? I'm not really sure. But when you brought that connection, it opened it all up for me. That correction. Oh, now I see. Now I see clearly what was all just scattered Christian information before. That's what we hope happens when we bring it. That we simply help people put pieces together that God is already doing. And the result of it is they say, well, Lord, you are so much better for me than I am for myself. I've tried to manage my own life. Lord, I really want you to manage it because, man, you seem to really know what you're doing. God, you're doing, I'm walking around with a speck in my eye. I can't see nothing. And you're doing stuff in my life and it's amazing. But I haven't even paying attention because I've been self-focused or I've been focused on how other people are affecting me. Let's say here's a correction situation that you might find. Let's say one of you seems to be falling into a tendency of complaining about circumstances. Whatever it is, the kids, the work, the in-laws, church, senior pastor, whatever it is. To be able to say, you know what, I don't know if you're aware, but recently it seems like there's a lot of tone and things that you say that seem to be complaining. You're more tending to complain than you are to express gratefulness. Can you help me know why that might be? I don't know. I haven't even thought about it. Life's hard. I got stress. I got this. Okay, that's understandable, but I know who you want to be. I know you don't want to be somebody who's known as a complainer. So that may be something you might want to give some attention to. What's happening? And then you're unlocking a door for them. And now they have something on their radar that wasn't there before. And now they're saying, yes, I am drifting into complaining. And yes, I've started to let myself go. And rather than take my soul to task, I've started to blame other things. And I'm starting to believe that my problems are primarily out there and not in here. And that gentle correction has redirected my view away from everything else out there to what God is doing in here. And now I'm realizing, what is the commonality in all this? Well, it's because I'm not getting my way. I'm not getting my way in my ministry. I'm not getting my way at work. I'm not getting my way with my kids. Now I'm starting to see the connection, and God is starting to show me, wow, maybe the problem isn't just complaining. Maybe the problem is I want my own way, and I'm frustrated, and you're helping me. That's the beauty of a small correction. It creates an opportunity to make bigger connections. Small corrections help make big connections. And that's why we need it. And our job as correctors is not to make those big connections. Well, I see it here, I see it here, I see it here, I see it here. It's everywhere. Your life is just totally shot through with this problem. That's not our job. Our job is surgery. Our job is, well, I'm trying to deal with this eye surgery. Once we're done with surgery, you're going to recognize you're going to have to retrain yourself to see a little bit. You've over-adapted to one eye. We're going to have to help you work on that other eye to get it up to speed. Those are things that can happen, but we help people in that. So let me give you a wonderful example from my life on a correction that came to me that I still remember. This was 6th grade, and I was in an English class, and I was terrible at math, but I was good at English. I like to write, so I had skill at writing, and so I was in 6th grade English, and Mrs. Pritchett was the teacher, and so one time, I don't know what it was, but in my 6th grade rebellion, whatever that looked like in 6th grade. We had a paper. I didn't think about it to do it. And so I literally wrote it that morning. And I was good enough at putting words on a page, on a one-page thing, that I could do that. And so I turned it in, and I'm like, I'm good at this, And so I got it back, and it was a D. And I had never gotten anything but A's in my class. And so I just got the paper, and it's D. And so we're leaving class, and I'm actually kind of mocking it. Look at, man, I got a D, And I walk out of class, and Mrs. Pritchett's standing at the door, and she just stops me, and she said, Andy, let me see your paper. She said, this is a D paper. You're not a D student. And that changed a lot in my life. That's all she needed to say. I'm not a D student. I can aspire to greater. I never did that again. High school, college, never did that again. If it came to writing something, I mailed in some bad math. But that was a skill problem. That was not an effort issue. But I was, it was a wonderful example of correction. It was for my good. It was gently brought. It wasn't compelling me. It was a true insight for my good, and it had massive implications in my life. We can do that in our marriages for one another. Because she knew who I could become, and she was willing to take some risk to remind me of that. That's what correction should be. Martin Lloyd-Jones said this: as we travel through this journey of life, we are to help men and women by a word of encouragement, a word of cheer, perhaps a word of rebuke, but a word that will remind them that they are under God, and that if they are in Christ, they are precious to Him. We learn that we can correct one another well. So before I end, any questions? This is something that can get really like hard to deal with because a lot of times we don't think of correction in a positive way. So any questions about this before we take a break? Yeah.
So even if we have the magic words and the right
Yeah.
attitude and everything,
Yeah.
how long, since you've been counseling couples, do you see it take to gain that trust? Because if you've done this poorly for a long time, you're gonna have
Yes.
to gain
Yeah. Yeah.
how long does it take to kind of build that trust or develop it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question.
Repeat that.
Yeah, the question is, and this is what I got from it. It's a great question, but I'm gonna try to say it. Yeah, I'm gonna do it right now. So the question was, what's up with that? Actually, it wasn't the question. Uh, the question was, if you've had a pattern where this hasn't been a strength in your marriage, or maybe there's been some problems in the area of correction, how long does it take to build trust in order to be able to do this? It's a wonderful question. Um, my general answer for a group is different than what I might say for an individual couple, but for a group, I would say this. First of all, start with how are we doing with what we did last night? So let's start working on that. Let's acknowledge, you know what? We haven't done correction well. I know I haven't done it well. I think we have a pattern in life where maybe it isn't being done well. We need to grow and do that better. But let's start with, trust God to the things that the other person needs to be corrected on. Let's trust God that He doesn't need us. That's a huge part of correction, is we're never needed. God will get to that person, whether we're there or not. We're not the essential ingredient to someone's change. You're not the essential ingredient to your child's change. We are a means of grace. And so what we want to do is we want to relate to one another in a gracious way. And then as part of it, say, well, eventually, let's talk about how we can do this. A great way to do it, can be hard, is for someone to humble themselves and say, listen, I really do want anything you think will help me. I want you to feel free to share it with me. There's a couple of questions, and I'll get to this. This is the way I would do it. One is a great way to talk about this. There's two questions in your exercises there. Is to ask yourself, what do I tend to contribute that turn a correction into a conflict? What do I do that, and let's say you're receiving it. What do I do? Do I get defensive? Do I withdraw? One of the things Jill pointed out to me one time is that she would bring correction, and I had a chair in our bedroom that was kind of like my pondering chair. And she said one time, I feel like when I'm trying to bring you something, you sit in the chair, and this is effectively what I was doing. I was rope-a-doping. I'm ready, bring it. And there's nothing in my posture that said I was really open. The words were open, but the whole body language was, I'm bracing myself. And so she said, it can be hard because I feel like you're already resistant before I start to talk. And then she felt like that puts me in a position where I feel like I have to press it. And so there are things that each of you might do that makes the other person feel like we're now moving into conflict. It might be the way you bring it. It might be, for example, when you bring it. It's like 11 o'clock at night. Before I go to bed, I just want to remind you of this. This is a real problem. You got to work on it. Night. And then, the other person's like this the rest of the night. Not a good idea. Or worse, you do what we used to do, is get into conflicts that last till 3 a.m. And you still have to tap out at some point. You're not going to resolve it at 3 a.m. And so I think there's a way to sort of say, what do I do that does it? And you can even bring that, here's what I feel like that I do that I can make it hard. Or maybe it's on the giving of correction end. Do I bring it in a way that seems to benefit me and not you? Do I have godly goals in mind? Do I want to release you to the Lord, or do I feel like you need to acknowledge the change? Sometimes what couples do is they're feeling like a good correction is when you say, yes, I agree, and I will change. That is never the goal. That is lording over someone's conscience. And we cannot do that. We have to release that to the Lord. We can say, can you consider this? Listen, if the Lord, if you don't think it's what the Lord has for you, then please just, let it go. But I'm more interested in you hearing from the Lord than I am in you hearing from me. But I just wanted to bring this to you. Another thing you can do, this is a conversation Jill and I had. In fact, we do this is a question we do premarital counseling. We have each person in the couple say, finish this sentence. I will tend to respond graciously to correction if, and then you fill in the blank. I will tend to respond, I think that's in your notes. I will tend to respond graciously to correction if, and then we each share what we'd like from the other person as the way they bring it. It's amazing. When people do this, they'll realize they're very different. Jill and I realize this. And because what happens, we tend to correct people out of what seems to work for us, right? This works for me, but it doesn't necessarily work for the other person. So Jill, for example, her idea of good correction is that I come, and I'm going to describe this, and I'm watching you, so you can tell me, okay? Yeah. But where it needs to come in clouds of love. Like, it needs to come with just like a rainbow in the clouds of love. And she needs to feel it's just coming, and it's coming, and it's going to envelop you. And within there's just a little tiny few raindrops of corrective thought within the cloud, and then the rainbow comes back. And then it descends, and there's clarity and blue sky. That's how she likes to receive correction. Yeah. I would say that's not naturally a guy's strength. So I've had to learn how to create that scenario. With credibility. I'm not like that. She does that for me. I'm just waiting for the but. Okay, clouds. Okay, somewhere in there's a lightning bolt, and can we just remove the clouds? I want to see the lightning bolt. Let it hit me, and then I'll just go away. No, really, what I really, and I don't want to portray myself as a guy who just, hey, just bring it on, man. I'm not that guy. I hate that, right? But what helps me is for somebody to come and say, hey, listen, man, I want them to give me a vision for why this is good for me. Yep. And not because they think it's good for me, but just, here's a great example of correction for me. Andy, let's go to an elders meeting. Oh, well, let's see. One from Jill. It might be, let's say we were in a meeting together, and I was missing some signals, and I was relating to the couple, and I said things that seemed that she felt like were probably too direct and too harsh. And believe it or not, I can do that. And I wasn't reading the room. That's a big thing. Are you reading the room? And so if she comes to me and she says, honey, I know you want to help these folks, and they really want help. I think you might not have noticed that when you said this, it seemed to affect her. And maybe you've got to be a little more conscious of when there's a husband and wife, that she needs a little more attention in how you say things than he does. And she just leave it at that example. And I might say, well, okay, okay, that's great. And then what I like to do is, I don't like somebody piling on examples of it. Let me take that. Let me think about it. If I don't come back to you, then just come back to me and say, hey, how'd it go? Did you receive that well? Or was anything I brought? Let's keep the fellowship in it. But I don't need somebody trying to convince me. I don't need you to bring a case to me. And I don't need a lot of clouds. Give me a little space. I just want a desert. I don't need clouds. I need a desert with nothing out there so I can sit in the middle of my desert and ponder what you just said. I'll tend to respond better if you let me do that. So she's had to learn that. What works for her does not work for me. And so as couples, this is usually where guys get bashed. Okay, husbands, you got to know how to do this. Wives, you need to know how to do it too.
That's right. Yes.
This is not just a guy thing. We think like we are, not like the other person is. And correction is one of the most pure ways that we think of the interest of others more than ourselves. That's the point. Correction is the way in a marriage we think of the interest of others more than our own interests. So any questions besides this great question? I turned that question into a whole other point. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. So I know we're going to take a break. You want to jump into break?
That was really good, Andy. Wasn't that good? Yeah. Yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of nuggets in this thing to unpack. I mean, there's so many things. I want to just say a couple things, though, that really just reminded me of things from our own marriage. And I so appreciate this, Andy. I mean, I said to Andy before I got up, I said, if you could make sure that maybe today, I know in correction, last night you talked about speech, but one of the things that is hard is how do you actually go about changing your speech in your marriage? The only way to do it is through this. It's the only way, right? It's the ability to be able to hear from your spouse and then listen to what the Spirit of God is saying to you through the Word of God and make the change, and then involving others around you to say, hey, my wife had this observation of me. Do you see this as well? Yeah, that's great. And being open enough and humble enough to say, if they say, I do, and you don't, to say, well, if others see it, it must be true. But we spend all of our time doing this. I got to go find examples I think she's a little wacky. Could you give me examples of where you see this? And luckily, in our marriage, God has used Jill so much to remind me, I don't need other examples, right? Early in our marriage, we were not good at this. Our first 5 years, we had a great first 5 years, but I realized that I wanted my wife to speak honestly with me, but she wasn't. I'd ask her, hey, I want your opinion on this, and she'd give me a little thing, and I'd say, well, I know that's not your real opinion, and she'd kind of, poo-poo the idea or whatever. And finally, one day we're driving down the road, and I just got done preaching at Canyonville Bible Academy, so you know where that's at, down in South. And my preaching stunk. It was awful. We're in the car, we're leaving, and I said to her, what is wrong with my preaching right now? And she just said, do you really want to hear? And I said, no. Yeah. Well, my response was different. I said, babe, I've always wanted to hear. And she said, no, you haven't. And I said, what do you mean I haven't? And she said, for 5 years, when I give you a correction, you immediately get angry. And you've taught me never to correct you. So do you really want to hear? And we're driving down the road, right? It's like, I can slam the car in the diesel and driving next to me, or I can just say, yeah, I do. And she then began to lay out the pride that she saw in my life, the way she saw it in my preaching, the examples she noticed for my preaching. And if you want to know why there was no effect, it's because you're in the way. And it was so gracious, but it changed our marriage because I realized, as R.C. Sproul has said in a wonderful little book about a marriage, he said, the wife one has, by and large, is the wife one has trained. Now, you can put that spouse in there, and you want to talk about getting slapped. And I realized I had trained her on how to respond to my sin. And I needed to change, right? The biggest change that came in my life was when I began to see correction in light of the gospel. So if you guys have been through TF1, how many of you have gone through TF1? It's a lot of you. That's our theological training class. You have gone through and you've read the first article we always read every year, The Cross and Criticism. And if you'll remember, what that says to us is, the cross already says that God has criticized us more than anybody else in this universe ever will. He's already said our sin was enough to put the Son of God on the cross. So therefore, we can receive correction from others in light of that cross, meaning they really don't know an infinitesimal percentage of really my sin, like God knows. But it also says in the same moment that God loves me more than anybody else ever will because Jesus came to the cross. So I can receive correction and I can give correction with this reservoir of love because of the gospel, right? That began to change the way I viewed the correction I would receive from my wife or even from other people. I could see it for what it was. It was just a moment that God was using for means of grace to say, this is potentially an issue in your life that you need to take a long look at. And if need to be, utilize others to say, this is what somebody said. I so appreciate their observation. Do you see this as well? With an open-handed look at this, right? Without the tension of, I think they're wrong, you prove it for me. No, it was, they're probably right, but I want to see it more clearly, right? And what that begins to do to your soul is you can be at rest. You can see that your God's, this other person, if they're your spouse, they're the child of God as well, and they're just speaking things to you as a means of grace to reveal something to you. And that was transformative for us in our marriage. It was the ability for Jill to be able to say to me very clear things. One of the things I've always appreciated about her is she's the one gal that I grew up with or around that I dated that was never afraid of me. They could just look me in the eye and say, you are this. And I would say, I love that about you, but I hate it. And as we've grown together, that's been one of the beauties, I think, that's helped us is this gospel overlaying all of this to see this very clearly. Guys, I want to give you just a resource, and you can take it and use it sometime. This is for the guys. Ladies, you don't use this for beating them with. It's a book called The Complete Husband by Lou Priolo. And the reason I recommend that book is because in that book, he gives questions to ask in each chapter. And it's not just your typical, so how are we doing? These are digging deep questions. And you've got to, I had one guy, I took a year to go through the book with him. He didn't get through the first chapter of questions with his wife in a year. Because they're very direct, very clear questions. And it allows you to begin to probe into your wife. They're called 1 Peter 3:7 questions. Living with your wife in an understanding way. Understanding her. And then seeing as well how these moments, how you have responded to things through the years, you've trained her, if you will. And wives, you can use it as well to then turn it to yourself and say, well, what about me? Right? But it's a good resource along those ways. Listen, one thing that really hit me as we were beginning this morning is, and I want to make sure this is really clear for those of you that have come. You may be battling with something in your marriage that you feel like is just we talked last night and we got into a fight. Or we don't know how to resolve, you name it. One of the beauties of a weekend like this is we're away and we have time. There's no other agenda. So among you, you have friends, but you also have your church leaders, pastors that are here. We're here for you. People say, well, this should be a weekend off for you. It's not for me. I'm not here to have a weekend off. I'm here to serve you. And so are other elders and their wives. Andy and Jill are here for that reason as well. Listen, if you got something that you want to chat about and you feel like, man, this is a burden on me, I want to talk about it, then pull us aside and let us know that. That's also going to require those of you that aren't having those issues, if you do happen to see us out talking to somebody, don't assume they're having a marriage problem. Is that right? So, does that make sense? I mean, just assume that gospel stuff's happening and it's good. Okay? So, again, there's a lot of us. Let's make sure we don't walk out of the weekend without wrestling through some of the stuff, because you don't want to leave here hopeless. You want to leave here with a sense of, hey, man, we've got some help. We've got friends that can help us with this, and we're in this thing together with the gospel, right, in our hands, right? Okay?